Tonight on Primetime Politics, a plan for Gaza.
The plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately.
I support your plan to end the war in Gaza.
American and Israeli leadership come together with a roadmap for peace, but it's still unknown if Hamas will agree to the terms and if other countries will step forward to support the plan. Coming up, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Jon Allen, will share his assessment. Plus, tens of thousands of Canada Post workers are on the picket lines tonight, protesting sweeping changes to the corporation announced by the government last week. We will speak to both sides of the dispute. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. We begin this evening with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who today agreed to support a 20-point peace plan put forward by the Trump administration to end the war in Gaza. Now, among the key points, if both Israel and Hamas agree, the fighting will end immediately with battle lines frozen until conditions are met for a full Israeli withdrawal. The plan also sets out a timeline for a release of Israeli hostages and the release of hundreds of Gazans who've been apprehended since October 7, 2023. Now, Hamas would also decommission their weapons, food aid would be sent immediately into the Gaza Strip, and a stabilization force would oversee a rebuilding period that cannot include Hamas. That all said, it is important to note the plan also comes with a warning. Take a listen now to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done.
Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Jon Allen. From 2006 to 2010, he served as Canada's ambassador to Israel. Currently, he is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Canadian International Council and a Senior Fellow at the Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. Jon, thank you for the time.
My pleasure, Michael. Good to be with you.
And good to see you. So here we have Israel now agreeing to this 20-point peace plan from President Trump. But, you know, Hamas has not agreed. And from the reports I've seen, Hamas has not yet even seen a detailed proposal. So how valid is this agreement, do you think?
Well, you're right. It's not an agreement yet because only one side has agreed under considerable pressure from President Trump. And the other side is probably getting it. I think they would have seen a draft of it because a draft leaked a couple of days ago in the Times of Israel, a paper in Israel. But they're getting the final, hopefully in the next little while. They will have to review it, and hopefully they will agree to it. And if they do, then we will see an end to this horrible war, which is about to move into its third year, and some very positive elements like the release of the hostages, the end of death and destruction to 2 million Palestinians, and hopefully a lot of humanitarian aid flooding into the Gaza Strip, at least initially.
You know, I'm going to get to the humanitarian aid in a moment, but, you know, you say hopefully Hamas agrees to it, but under the terms of this deal, to agree to this proposal, Hamas must also agree to have no role in governing Gaza going forward. How likely is that?
Well, I think it's quite clear that the West, the Gulf, the Palestinian Authority, the Americans, and certainly the Israelis have no interest in having Hamas part of the governing structure in Gaza or in any part of Palestine. So if they choose not to accept the terms of the agreement, which, by the way, first of all, allow for the release of 250 Palestinians who have been in jails for very serious offenses, and 1,200 other prisoners that have been detained since the war started. It allows those that are prepared to lay down their arms and commit to nonviolence to an amnesty. Others will be allowed to leave. So given that they are now a spent force, really an insurgency, it's not a bad deal. And if they cared at all about Palestinian people that they are supposed to be governing, they'd snatch the deal and agree to it immediately.
Mm-hmm. Now, this plan also calls for the creation of an international stabilization force, and this would essentially oversee Gaza once the war theoretically ends. How hard will it be to create this coalition to actually step in and oversee Gaza?
Yes, well, the idea is to have this board that it looks like Donald Trump and Tony Blair would co-chair, and have representatives from the Gulf and from other Arab states and from the West, hopefully, on it. And then you would have, as you mentioned, a stabilization force that would come in, root out any insurgencies. There are other terrorist groups in Gaza, not just Hamas. So there might be remnants of Hamas or those groups that would come in, establish the rule of law, oversee the influx of lots of humanitarian aid, and then begin the process of reconstruction, hopefully first by tents and then otherwise clearing the rubble and etc. So how hard is it? I think if Hamas agrees and if Israel withdraws relatively quickly, then I think the Gulf states in particular, the Saudis, UAE, Bahrain, and some others might, with the help of the West, either in terms of training or strategic advice or arms, would help. And it's possible. It's possible, and that's what all of the day after plans have really alluded to, that you would have a force that would come in from the outside initially and bring rule of law, peace, and stability.
Okay, you say possible, and I'm wondering if that means to say that Donald Trump will lean on, the countries that were, for example, supportive of the Abraham Accords, whether they were signatories to it or not. Is that who he'll be leaning on in the region, and are they willing to be participants in this?
That's exactly who. And now he's got Indonesia, who attended the meetings in New York that he hosted. Turkey was there as well. And there are the Abraham Accord countries, Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, and the UAE, and the Saudis, and perhaps the Qataris could also provide troops or equipment, etc. But again, I hope the West would also get involved somehow to show that there was a broad-based support for this very necessary set of events.
Mm-hmm. Jon, there's also almost a carrot and stick element to this, and I don't know if that's an apt metaphor, but essentially there's this stark choice. Agree to this, get peace and food, or the bombardments will continue. How troubled are you that food, which by the Geneva Convention should not be used as a tool of war against civilians, is being dangled in the air as the only way to get food for your people is to do this?
I've been troubled by it since the second week of the war. If you recall, Michael, there was a 2-week siege at the beginning of the war 2 years ago, and then there was an 11-week siege following the breach of the March of the ceasefire in March. So I'm extremely troubled by it. I'm also extremely troubled by the bombings, by the ground invasion, by the lack of medical assistance, etc. And that's why I very much wish that Hamas would take the threat seriously. I mean, they haven't done too much to protect the Palestinian people in Gaza yet, and I do hope that they'll take this offer and see it for what it is, ending the war and ending the suffering of their own people, whom they're supposed to be governing.
Mm-hmm. So, as you, who knows the region well and has worked there, what are you watching out for?
Well, I'm watching out for Hamas. I'm watching to see how this will be received in Israel by the Prime Minister's right-wing Messianic ministers. I'm watching to see whether, if they pull out or threaten to pull out, whether other opposition leaders like Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz and Yair Gallant, who represent other more moderate parties, would then jump in and support the Prime Minister, because the Israeli people want to see an end to the war, primarily because they want to see the hostages home, and they want to see their soldiers out of harm's way. So I'm hopeful that he will be able to deliver the deal that he has agreed to. And of course, I'm hopeful that Hamas will agree as well. I think we also have to keep in mind that the situation in the West Bank is still extremely troubling, and that this deal doesn't really address that, although President Trump was quite clear last week that he does not support de jure annexation of the West Bank, but there is still settlement activity going on. There is still settler violence going on, and we have to continue to be concerned about that as well.
Jon, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much.
Well, to the matter of Canada Post now, as thousands of workers across the country remain off the job. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers calling an immediate strike last Thursday after the federal government gave Canada Post a mandate to cut and reform. It did so as the union and management were trying to negotiate a new collective agreement, but the mandate to turn things around at the Crown Agency, well, that has created even more uncertainty. Well, with more on the strike, we're now joined by Jon Hamilton, Vice President, Communications and Stakeholder Engagement at Canada Post. Mr. Hamilton, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on, Michael.
Listen, we're now a few days into this latest strike by the union. What's been the impact so far in Canada Post?
Well, the impact is such that our operations are shut down right across the country. We're not able to serve our customers yet again. And we all know the impact that has on small businesses, charities, and a number of customers that rely on Canada Post. So it is always impactful when the postal system is shut down, and we're going to try and get things started back up. But we need to reach new collective agreements, and to date we've not been able to find the common ground needed to reach those agreements.
Mm-hmm. So no common ground yet. And to hear it from the union, they essentially say they didn't really have a choice here, because they were in the midst of bargaining talks with the corporation when they were blindsided by the government's announcement last week. How should the union have proceeded if not this strike?
Well, it's their legal right to strike, and I'm not going to prescribe to the union what they should or shouldn't do. But as we view this, our financial situation is obvious to most people. The amount of mail in the system has been declining as Canadians have been moving away from mail and more to digital communications for 20 years now. At the same time, the number of addresses we serve increases each year. So revenues down and costs going up on a yearly basis have led to massive losses. So, and we tried to keep it going for a long time, and then we drew on our cash reserves, and then we came to the point where now taxpayers are funding our losses. We're on the hook to pay them back, but we have no means to do that at this point. So we need to transform. So ideally, we'd be working together to ensure that we can make the changes that are necessary. Companies go through changes all the time, and companies are able to work with their union. and try and mitigate or reduce the impact on employees. Instead, we've not been able to get to any conversation about any change with our union. And a lot of what we've been putting forward over the last 2 years of negotiations has been changes that are pretty modest, but protect what our employees have, but allow us to grow the business. But the union, unfortunately, has remained, very fixed on maintaining the status quo, which clearly isn't an option.
Okay, but you have essentially now been given a mandate by this government to cut and make changes at Canada Post. How does that affect the global offers that you were talking about earlier this month for the workers?
Well, we need to ensure that we have the changes in there that will allow us to achieve the transformation. The government was very explicit that we need to turn this thing around, and we can't be dependent on the taxpayer to fund our losses, and we don't want to be there. So we need to make those changes, but it's not going to close the gap where the union's at, because their offer in August, their last offer, had $2.8 billion in new costs over the 4 years of the agreement. 4 more personal days to a total of 17 paid personal days, plus stat holidays, plus up to 7 weeks vacation. Hiring in any services that we contract out today, like truck drivers, a veto over any changes within operations, and more costs and things like that. So we went back to them and said, look, come back with something that's more reflective of our current reality. And we can negotiate. They didn't want to do that, so we're now preparing those offers and hope to be able to present them to them this week.
Mm-hmm. Now, an argument has been made that if, for example, Canada Post were to increase the rates that it charges for stamps and for delivering things, you could raise an additional $1 billion in revenues in a single calendar year. Is that an option for the corporation rather than cutting jobs?
The reality is we need to fix the postal system and make it more affordable for Canadians. And simply raising prices and not making those changes just covers over problems that have been persisting for many years. So what the government's done is given us the freedom, although we need to put forward a plan and make sure that that's signed off on, but to go out and make the changes so we're making the system align with where Canadians are at and what they need. Just holding everything in place, hoping that mail comes back, is not a workable solution. So, we need to fix our core business, that it's a delivery business. We are structured to build mail, but mail peaked back in 2006 at 5.5 billion letters. Today, we deliver 2 billion letters a year. We need to make those changes, but we can do it in a thoughtful way. We've got thousands of thousands of employees who are going to be retiring over the next few years. We have a chance to really lean into attrition. We have post offices that were rural 30 years ago and were protected then, but are now in suburban or urban areas. We can focus on that so we can get back to the intent of the rural moratorium, which was to protect those services in rural, Indigenous, and northern communities.
What type of timeline do you think the corporation needs to turn things around? $10 million a day is the loss being quoted by the minister. How quickly can you stop that? How quickly can you at least break even as a corporation?
Well, we need to start as soon as possible. We needed to start years ago, but we needed the flexibility within our regulatory structure, because we have a collective agreement and a regulatory structure that we're both keeping things frozen in time. So we now have the changes to our regulatory structure. So we are now busy building our plans, and we'll be sharing that with the minister. We were given 45 days to do that. And then we have to move forward, but move forward in a thoughtful way. So it will take some time. You don't convert 4 million addresses to community mailboxes in a matter of a year. It would be chaos. So we will take our time. We'll go community by community and do it right. But we need to move as quickly as we can. And beyond that, we need to look at what changes we can make now.
Let me jump in here, John, because quickly running out of time. You talk about, and I hear you saying about thoughtful change. You're talking about leaning into attrition at this moment in time, but that's workers. What about the managers of Canada Post who have overseen this period of loss? Will they also be a part of the change? Will they be held accountable for not turning a profit?
Oh, absolutely. I think the minister was clear in his direction, and we fully support it, that there should be no stone unturned. So we need to look at our organization from top to bottom. We need to make change. But I want to be clear, though, from management, we've been on this train for a while. We've reduced our headcount. We've had layoffs. A number of my colleagues are no longer with the company. And we've made other changes over the years. Just for example, we changed to a different benefit, to a different pension plan for new employees more than 16 years ago. So 60% of our management are now on the defined contribution plan. We have tried to, in every round of negotiations, introduce that to CUPW, the last union that still get the defined benefit pension plan, but been unsuccessful. And even this round, we pulled that off the table. So we've been doing a number of things with management, but we're going to have to do more. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay, Jon, sorry we're out of time, but really appreciate the time for this. We'll speak again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, let's continue the conversation now with Jim Gallant, a negotiator for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Jim, thanks for coming to the studio.
Thanks for having us in.
Listen, there's a couple of things I want to address from you of what we just heard, but first I want to begin with a more broad question. So here you are, you're now out on strike. Are you worried that all you're really doing at the end of the day is proving Canada Post irrelevant to Canadians by stopping service?
Well, we're not worried about that, really. You end up with, we're hearing from mayors, premiers, the public saying that they want their service, and you're hearing from small businesses on all the stations that they're not going to survive without Canada Post. Because we are the right deal. I won't say the cheapest deal, but we're the right deal in town. They use us, they depend on us, and we want to be there serving them. We don't want to be on strike, but we've been forced into this position by the government and by Canada Post, and it's a really big problem. People are pointing it towards the union instead of pointing it where the problem's coming from.
Okay, and I don't know if you include the minister in that, but you know, we heard from Minister Lightbound last week, and he says the corporation is losing millions of dollars each day, $10 million each day. How is that sustainable?
It's not, that wouldn't be sustainable, but you've got to remember that we've been in a legal strike position since last November, and that's been hanging over the post office all year long. Postage went up in January, and Canada Post actually, in the first 2 quarters, had over $370 million in new revenue. But because they've got this cloud hanging over us, they won't sign a collective agreement. They say they're losing money. You'd have to think, they say 10 million, it's almost an Austin Powers movie when they say it, because you know, what's the real number? What are they losing? They're always using big numbers to try and scare the public.
You don't believe in the numbers?
I don't believe it's $10 million. I believe they're losing money because we're in a strike position, and fewer customers are using Canada Post, and we're still working, right?
Except, you know, we just heard from Canada Post, and they say the very fact that, you know, less people are using it on a daily basis, as the population grows, at the end of the day, it's untenable, and they need to make rather substantial changes, not just tinkering on the sides, but fundamentally make changes to the corporation, and that does mean a workforce that's adaptable or willing to be adaptable. Are you?
We only go to houses that have mail or product and businesses that have mail and product each day. That's the only ones we're paid to. It's done by a percentage basis. We don't get paid for places we don't go to. And in the 1980s, we had probably about 15,000 more workers, and in the last few years, we've had about 5,000 more workers. We're somewhere around 50,000 workers now. It's less. Routes get reevaluated when there's less mail to sort. There's less sorters. All those things are happening. There's fewer postal workers than there's ever been, and that happens naturally in a fluid motion. And Canada Post, instead of dealing with it that way, is now trying to make major cuts to service Canada Post shouldn't get to decide what the service is. The government shouldn't get to decide what the service is. Customers and Canadians should get to decide if their mail is going to get to the door. If I send you a parcel or you send me a parcel, I bet you we both expect that parcel to come to our door, somebody to knock, instead of it going a kilometer or two down the street.
But would Canadians push back at the cost? Because again, to listen to Canada Post, they've talked about the bargaining that they've gone under. They talk about the economic pressure. They want to explore things like a defined contribution plan rather than a defined benefits plan for retirement. And they say that the union has not been very flexible on that. What do you say to that? Because I hear what you're saying. Yeah, Canadians want to get their parcels, but they also don't want to feel like they are supporting a business that cannot, at the very least, break even.
The minister told Canada Post to fix the management side of it too. They haven't hired any letter carriers lately or clerks lately, but I can tell you today on Canada Post's site, there's a job for a manager of change. So they're going to add more managers because the minister says there's going to be change, instead of using the managers they have, because those managers don't know what they're doing. That's the problem at Canada Post. Doug Ettinger came in somewhere around 2018-19, and Canada Post says they haven't made any money since. That they've been living off of what was in the cupboard, and now they've borrowed money from the government. That's the first time in my 37-year career that Canadians had to loan Canada Post money. So I have to say that it's the management of Canada Post that's the problem. We agree that we are in a problem right now, and what they say is it doesn't matter how we got there. Well, how do we get out of it with the same people that got us there? That's the problem.
So how do you see this working its way through?
At this point, we want the government to back off on the cuts to the service, because if they cut the service and I'm no longer bringing you your parcel to your door, there's other delivery outfits that will do that, and that's what businesses and Canadians want. So if they cut that service, we're going to get fewer parcels, and it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we need that service level, and then the government has made a line in the sand last week, and obviously the employer sees that and is emboldened by it. They were going to make us an offer last Friday. They took that offer back, and now they're going to make a different one. Do you think it's going to get better? I don't.
So is this dependent to end the strike? Is this about the government stepping back from its cuts, or the mandate it's now given Canada Post, or is this about Canada Post putting forward a proposal for workers that you're going to be happy with?
Well, there's two things there. So the first thing is that if we get a collective agreement that works for postal workers, obviously, and it needs to be ratifiable by the membership, that will settle the strike. But there still will be a fight around what the government has said they're going to do to slash the service. I saw a small town mayor in Ontario yesterday on TV. I've seen a number of business people saying that Canada Post is needed. The government hasn't listened to them, and the government's list of slashes that they made on Thursday is Canada Post's Christmas wish list from last November. It's not the government making policy. It's Canada Post management making policy, and the government following them.
Jim Gallant, I always appreciate the time. We'll speak again. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. A reminder that tomorrow we will have special programming for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, so please tune in for that. And as for PTP, we will see you next time. Take care.